Miami, Florida, at the World Women's Congress for a Healthy Planet. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Rosina Wiltshire from Barbados, who is a member of DAWN, and she'll be telling us about their organization. First, Dr. Wiltshire, tell us what DAWN is.
DAWN is an organization of South women which links grassroots women across Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Pacific. DAWN is the acronym for Development Alternatives with Women for a New Era.
What do you do? What is your work?
Well, DAWN is involved in trying to link the experiences of women on the ground with the macro policies that direct people's lives, translating those issues and those experiences into the policymaking arena and vice versa. We have decided to focus on three major issues: the economic alternative frameworks, environment and development, and reproductive rights. And the Secretariat is based in Barbados. It was previously in Brazil, but we agreed that it would change every 3 to 4 years. It would change regions.
What is the relationship, as you see it, between what's called the so-called developed world and the so-called undeveloped world?
Well, I think that the distinction is a poor distinction because what we have done is to equate economic wealth with development, which means that we ignore the ecological dimensions of human relations, the spiritual, the cultural, and the political. In making development primarily a material phenomenon, we have really distorted the world and its direction, which has brought us to the ecological crisis that we have today. Our focus on materialism, overconsumption, and hoarding, greed in fact, has really divided the world in artificial terms, distorted our conception of what constitutes wealth, distorted our concept of what constitutes development and progress. And I think that until we begin to recognize that there needs to be balanced development, which links the material to the spiritual, to the ecological, to the political, and to the cultural, we will not attain sustainable development, because at present our economic focus makes sustainable development a contradiction in terms. Progress is degradation of the resources, it is overuse, it is overconsumption. And what we have today is, in the north, overconsumption of some, but there is also underconsumption within the north. There is also a large group of indigenous people, of people of color, who do not enjoy the material well-being of many who characterize the north. And in the south, we have people who overconsume as well, but the majority of whom are materially deprived. That is one of the links that sort of binds us. The other element that binds us is that what happens, the consumption of the north deprives, in a world of finite resources, deprives others of the capacity for attaining their own livelihoods and their own well-being. So that until we recognize that we are linked not only in terms of a small world, but our actions individually, whether we be in the so-called north, developed or the South underdeveloped. And I said I don't like those terms because they take us away from the reality of where we need to go. What our actions individually influence the whole, so that we need to move away from the North-South dichotomy, which is misleading.
If we don't like the term underdeveloped, and what would we say? The majority of the world?
No, I think we have to talk of maldevelopment, and maldevelopment we have in the North and in the South. I think that if you recognize that development constitutes a range of elements, the material, the spiritual, the cultural, the political, the ecological, then your evaluation of who is developed and who is underdeveloped would change significantly, because you will be looking for balance along those lines. And any country in which 25% of the people consume over 70% of the world's resources would be considered maldeveloped. And you would be looking at how people relate to nature and the land, whether they abuse and misuse the land. You will be looking at the cultural elements, whether they are in harmony, people are in harmony with one another and themselves. You'll be looking at human well-being in its wholeness. And then your labeling and grading of states, I think, would alter significantly. So what we consider developed now might be way down on the scale, and what we consider underdeveloped now may rise very high on the scale. This is not to suggest that material deprivation is not an important indicator of development, but I'm saying it is one of the indicators. And we need not right now, because that is the main indicator, we tend to consider people, we tend to discard the lessons that they might be able to teach us in other areas, so that culturally, spiritually, ecologically, I think we need to recognize that there are a lot of lessons to be learned by the North from the South.
I learned from the Native Americans a word, wasichi, which meant greed. And it seems to me that many people in North America are suffering from a lack of spiritual harmony, knowing that we're children of the earth, of cooperation, and that this wasichi, this greed, has taken a great toll on this culture. What spiritual lessons do you think that we have to learn from this part of the planet that takes so very much from the peoples of the world?
Well, I think that, I mean, that's
Is that a hard question?
That's a very hard question, because I think that if we define our own development, if we define wealth in terms of hoarding and overconsumption, then we lose our sense of self. We lose our connectedness to the earth, to the community, because it's each man for himself. The maxim, I am my brother or my sister's keeper, has a very highly spiritual dimension to it. It links us, it harmonizes us with one another and with our environment. The earth as a gift, which we must care rather than exploit. I mean, we talk about exploiting natural resources. Traditional peoples have tended to hold nature in awe, have tended to regard nature's bounty as a gift which they must conserve and care for. Now that is living in harmony with nature and with self. Community links have tended to be much stronger, so that people are not alienated from themselves and community and nature. They are living in harmony with their environment, and that begins with them, their bodies, their families, their communities. It is not the atomized every man for himself maxim that seems to characterize our modern relationships, and which is epitomized in the North. This is an important lesson. It is an important lesson for life and for survival, because I think that what we see in people's grasping for the religions of the television, the young people's grasping at drugs, it is a search for something that is deeper. They're going in directions that sometimes lead them off the hill. But you look at the high suicide rates, you look at the consumption of sleeping tablets. The North, there's an illness in the North, which is a spiritual illness. There's material plenty, but there is a void that nevertheless represents itself and manifests itself in a range of areas. And I think the lessons that we have rejected because we consider non-material progress, we consider traditional peoples primitive, we consider that we are the big brothers and sisters who have to go down and help these poor people. We do not listen enough and we do not learn enough, so that we cannot give anything.
Well, I would also say that in this area there are many people who don't have material wealth at all, and they are usually people of color, or people, white people also, who are in poverty. And then there's this great division between the people who have too much and are always grasping for more, and people who don't have material means to get through the day. There's many homeless people in this country, and many people who don't have health care or things that you would want in a sane society. Also, it seems like universally there's just such an unbalance of wealth. I saw a picture last night of a sheikh from Abu Dhabi, who is supposed to be the richest man on the earth, who has billions of dollars. He didn't look happy. He didn't look like his soul was at rest. And you look at what's his name from New York,
Howard Trump.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, I think he is.
Bob Trump.
Howard Hughes, Donald Trump. But you know, one of the things I keep marveling at is that when I grew up in my community, no child went homeless. There was always a family who would take in a child whose parents had died, or whose parents may not have been able to take care of them because something may have happened to the mother, or the father lost his job or so. You never went to a home and didn't get food. If you were there at mealtime, you were offered a meal. And I'm not talking about supposedly wealthy households. I'm talking about a community that shared a value that, you know, that we were all responsible for one another. You walked down the road, you couldn't misbehave because everybody was your mother, everybody was your father. And this was not in an oppressive way. I'm talking about a sense of responsibility for other that has gone by the board now, because we are so anxious we're so greedy to accumulate more and more and more. Now, when again, someone who was well off 20 years ago didn't believe that they had to have a 3-car garage. They had to I mean, the consumption levels now at present are mind-boggling. What we consider necessary for a reasonable life And that has seeped down through not only North America, but it's seeping into the South too. So that you are getting a small elite of people who are living at levels way beyond the capacity of the society to maintain, which means that others, many more, go hungry. It is a philosophy of life which has, I think, which has been lost. A philosophy of enoughness and a need rather than greed. And it is destroying our children because the drugs are a fundamental lesson that I think we have to learn from, and we're not seeing the connection. A perception that anything that boosts the gross national product, whether it be drug sales or whether it be armament sales, anything goes. There is no morality in human interaction, and that is a recipe for self-destruction. And that is the direction in which we are going. The environment is just one other field, one other area in which plunder for personal gain is the order of the day. So,
and the disease that it is, you can never get enough when you're infected with that spiritual disease. So you want more cars, more toys, more shiny things, more missiles, more planes, more, and you just are on. You never get enough.
You never get enough, and you take
too
much more than your share,
right.
So that the majority of the peoples in the South, and women constitute the bulk of those people, women and children, go hungry. They can no longer, the land that was community land is now being privatized. There's no longer a community in place.
Could you describe what an average day is like for a working woman and her family?
The working life of women in my part of the world, the Caribbean, is becoming harder and harder and harder for the average woman. Several of our states have now fallen under the structural IMF World Bank structural adjustment policies and heavy debt burdens, and that requires that the state cuts back on subsidies for food. It requires, well, it doesn't require that it cuts back on subsidies for food, but it requires that is what they do. It requires that it cuts back on expenditure and subsidies, so that food goes, subsidies for education go, subsidies for health go. And what we are finding is that the women have to work harder and harder to earn less and less, because devaluation is also another feature of the structural adjustment policies. And with devaluation, the dollar gets less and less. In Guyana, for example, maybe 10 years, not less than 10 years ago, the dollar was, say, 3 to 1, now it's 100 to 1. So that if you earned the buying power of your dollar has just dissipated, because most of the products are imported. The school book for a child at elementary school level may cost the monthly wage of the parent. And where we have a lot of single mothers, you have women really struggling to educate their child, educate their children. To feed their children is becoming more and more difficult. The cost of one mango, a fruit, maybe $10. And you have an average wage of $1,200. I mean, and that's a good wage of a civil servant. So you have people trying, the rents are being quoted in American dollars because the dollars are dropping so fast. This is not only in Guyana, in Jamaica. A few months ago, the dollar was 7 to 1, now it's 18 to 1. Can you imagine what that does to a salary? What that does to a woman's capacity to manage her family's needs? She just finds herself working harder and harder to put bread into their mouths. And the bread is becoming more and more difficult to buy because the subsidies on those things are being removed. So basic things like sardines, fish, oil. I mean, you may have a tin costing of milk costing over $100. And this is a reality. This is not speculation. So a woman, they cannot afford to feed the children. The children are getting ill. They cannot afford to pay for the doctor's bills. The drugs, the subsidies are being removed, so those are going up. And the mother is, her leisure, the little leisure that she had is being dissipated because she has to spend more time at home taking care of ill children. The older girls now have to stay home to take care of children. And that is becoming a reality in my part of the world. And not only in my part of the world, across the third world, where structural adjustment policies imposed by the IMF and the World Bank in order to pay the debt.
And tell us a little bit
Is a
about
reality.
the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and the debt. I don't think North American people understand that oppression on the peoples of the world. I know it's a complicated subject, but it's very important.
Well, the debt servicing for many, right now, money is being, instead of money from the north being transferred from the wealthy, those who have money, to those who don't have. What is happening today is that money is being transferred from those who don't have to the north to pay back their indebtedness. And it is the poor women, it is the poor people who are paying by the sweat of their brow and their blood, with their blood and the blood of their children. They borrowed in the 60s, interest rates went up, over which they have no control. The governments borrowed. You also had terms of trade moving against them, and again, these countries of the South have no control over that, so that the goods they sold were valued less and less. So when they sold, they got less for it, and therefore had less to pay back the debt with. So the debt has kept accumulating. And I'm not, the part of the problem has been the consumption of a small elite in the South, of much of the wealth of the South. But the international banking system has been corrupt and unequal. Now, to pay back that debt, you have imposed by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund structural adjustment programs which require the countries to take certain measures. And those measures involve devaluation, reduction of expenditure, and that has meant the elimination of jobs in the public service, and for most of part, it is women who are getting laid off first, because they tend to be the temporary workers, they tend to be the part-time workers, so they lose their jobs. The debt repayment is a day-to-day burden for women, for the poor in the third world, in our countries.
Isn't the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, aren't they owned and controlled by the
US?
Yeah,
The
by
U-
the
by-
US
well-
and by rich Europeans and by
So-
the rich.
sorry.
And it's economic genocide is what we're talking about.
They're not owned. I mean, theoretically, all countries are supposed to belong to it, but the voting is weighted, and the U.S. has the major voting, the greatest weight. The European countries, the northern countries, have the greatest weight in these organizations. So the countries of the South are their voices really are not heard in these organizations. We are talking about genocide. We are talking about oppression. We are talking about misery and injustice and inequity of the highest order. And that is perpetuated in the name of economic growth, in the name of balance of payments, in the name of debt repayment. It is perpetuated in the name of, I suppose, primarily rich men.
Well, you nailed it on the head there. We have only a few minutes before we close, and I would like to just ask you quickly to say to our audience in North America how you think we can get together to stop this. We have issues that divide us as sisters. We have to deal with racism and class issues and North American imperialism and all these isms in order to build real unity. But we better do it, and we better do it fast.
Well, I think we have to start with ourselves. We have to start with our lifestyles. We have to start with our communities. And we have to start making our governments accountable, making our governments live up to a maxim of morality, equity, and justice for human well-being. Wherever humans may be, they deserve a life, a life of dignity. They deserve to eat, and we have to recognize that we are the keepers of our brothers and sisters wherever we are.
Thank you for talking with us, and take our love and support with you.
Thank you.